on Joyce Zongrone. Zongrone
That's the correct way to say it.
Zongrone.
Americans say it Zongrone, Italians say Zongrone.
On the first Italian Dickinson blacksmith,
Actually,
Galveston County.
yeah, Jones County. A quick little note about me. I'm the research team for Richmond Historical Society. Many years ago, the president and the curator, they found this house on Marsh Ruger's lot. He moves houses. He rescues houses. And he discovered it belonged to Joseph Giacchino from Dickinson. They restored it on their property. They have 5 acres as a guest house. So of course she thought since I was Italian, that I knew every Italian in the world. So I did the research for her. I am a second generation Italian from New York. I'm celebrated and I'm Sicilian. And my relatives live in the city. My dad and uncle moved upstate, so they could become firemen because I was in New York and now I can be firemen, so they moved upstate. So and I, like Kira's talking about, when I was growing up, nobody spoke Italian to me because I had to be an American. I took it in high school and college, and I was stationed at NATO in Naples when I was in the Navy, and they still laugh at me because in college and high school they teach the Tuscan dialect, the literary language, and they're all laughing at me because I was speaking phonetically correct and everybody else did. So. But I'm glad to be here because up until COVID, I used to go back to New York to San Gennaro every year, but now we just all stopped going to San Gennaro feast. Okay, Joseph Giacchino. I said he was Galveston's lone blacksmith because I did years of research. I started this in 2012 when they restored the house. And I only found 2 other blacksmiths mentioned in Dickinson, and they didn't last very long, a matter of weeks. One was on Main Street, and the other one was a black African-American blacksmith who was only here for a short period of time, and he moved on. And so I consider him the only blacksmith in Lake City because you can see he was there for over 30 years. So, okay. Like Kara said before, one of the interesting few things people don't know about is that at the turn of the century, the port of New York closed down its port to Italians and Jews. They didn't want them. So they shoved them on boats and shipped them to Louisiana and to Galveston. And they promised jobs, but there were no jobs. It was a lie. So if you ever get to see the Rosenberg Library, it's an art film done by Rice University called West of Hester Street. And it was actually interviews, Sam Giacchino, the actor, narrated. It was actually interviews of the Italians and Jews descendants who survived this, they kicked them out. They never even let them off the boat. When the boats came into Port of New York, they recruited them. So when they came to Louisiana, a lot of them stayed in Louisiana, but some of them came to Galveston. Now also, the German immigrants came to the Brazos River Valley first, and they farmed the land. This was at the turn of the century. And in about 1894, the Italians came into Brazos River Valley. But the German farmers knew that the lower Brazos River Valley, the land was fertile, but it was prone to flooding. So when it flooded in 1899, there was a huge flood. When it flooded, it destroyed everybody's crops. So they had nowhere to go. So the Brazos Valley Italians came from Sicily. They farmed cotton and corn in that flood-prone bottom that was passed over by the German and Czech immigrants. And 3,000 Italians populated that area. In 1899, the flooding forced them to leave. And so here you see the photo from the Institute of Texas Cultures of the Italians loading their produce. Okay. What happened was the Italian consul in Galveston, Clemente Nicolini, he decided he was going to help these people, like Kara said, move to Dickinson, because there was a lot of land in Dickinson. Of course, he was a property owner and he benefited from it. So he got in touch with Baron Edmondo Meyer Desplanches. Just one of us. Yeah, I had to Google that from my husband. He was in contact. He was a real big one. He was in D.C. He was the ambassador in D.C., the Italian ambassador. He was in contact with everybody in New York. And the New York Italians were looking for places to go because of the crowded tenements and horrible living conditions. And since they were all farmers, they were looking for rural states that had farmland. So he decided that Texas would be a suitable place for them. So when he he came to visit Dickinson. And there's local history says there were 150 Italians at the train station, convincing him it would be a good place for Italians. That's the politically correct version. The other version is that they paid them to meet him. Okay. Okay. However, Joseph Peter Giacchino took a different route before making Dickinson home for over 30 years. He was born in 1882 in Castiglione Tinella in northern Italy, which is 90 miles east of the French border, 50 miles south of Turin. Now all the race cars are. And he arrived at Ellis Island in 1906 at age 24. There's Joe. It's not a great picture, but these photos were all provided to me by his granddaughter, he lives in Chidona, Bernadine. And Bernadine was a good friend of Matt Falco. Y'all know Matt Falco. He was a good friend. That's how I found out all the good stuff, because Matt took me under his wing and introduced me to Bernadine. And she had all these family photos in a box, so we scanned them for her. So he came to Ellis Island in 1906 at age 24. Then he went to New Orleans. When he got there, he was quarantined because of the 1905 yellow fever epidemic. And the problem was that smugglers were smuggling bananas into New Orleans to avoid the customs, and the smuggler ships brought in the yellow fever. And the Italians were unloading the bananas on the docks, and they got yellow fever. And they were quarantined for several months. And according to the New Orleans Board of Health, 500 people died during the epidemic. Following the quarantine, here's the timeline for Joe. He did a stint as a bartender in Houston. He worked in the clay mines in Northern California, 1907 to 1911. And then he went traveling all over the Western United States as a farmer, and he worked on railroads. In 1914, he came to Hitchcock. He settled in Hitchcock first, and where he met his wife, Lillian Benigno. And he married her 3 years later in 1917. She became ill. Now, according to the granddaughter, they thought it was tuberculosis, but nobody ever really got a diagnosis. So the family doctor said they should go to California because the weather would be better. Well, he brought her to California, and she got worse. And so he came back to Hitchcock, and she died in 1929 at age 40. Following her death, he was left to be the mother and the father for 3 young children: Caroline, age 10, Anthony, age 8, and Andrew, age 5. And they moved from Hitchcock to Lake City for a year. And then back to Dickinson in 1930. The house that the Lake City Historical Society restored was newly built. And he lived and worked there as a blacksmith until age 80 in 1962. And after his death, his daughter, Caroline, worked in the seed store until she moved away in 1997. Both of his sons served in the Navy during World War II. This is Andrew. He was underage when he signed up in 1941. And that graduation picture is a fake because he didn't graduate. And according to to Bernadine, they kind of graduated him anyway because he was in the Navy. He didn't tell his father, but he ended up having to come home and confess because the Navy said you can't enlist because you're 17 without your parents sign. So Joe and his daughter Caroline, they went to Galveston to see him enlist, but I guess apparently the Navy took him anyway, and they shipped him out. He went to Camp Pendleton, where he contracted mumps. So he couldn't get shipped out. He was slated to be shipped out to Pearl Harbor. Had he didn't have the mumps, he might have died at Pearl Harbor. He was stationed later aboard the aircraft carrier, the first USS Lexington, the Lady Lex. He was an aviation mechanic. He was responsible for taking care of all the aircraft. The Lexington, for those of you who are history buffs, was instrumental in World War II because they turned back the Japanese invasion at the Battle of Coral Sea, because the Japanese had taken over an old British colonial port in Papua New Guinea, and they were cutting off the supply lines from the U.S. and Australia, and they were also cutting off the communications. Now, the Battle of Coral Sea was a success in that they stopped the Japanese, but they lost a lot of ships. And the USS Lexington sank in the Battle of the Coral Sea on May 8th. And 2,700 men survived in shark-infested waters, and 300 died at sea. And that's amazing, that 2,700 of them survived. Because of those of you who've seen Jaws, they talk about, they give a parting comment to the USS Indianapolis, which also was shot down by the Japanese, and almost the whole crew died on the Indianapolis because they were left in the shark-infested waters. So after the war, he went to Japan, and he used to send his sister Caroline souvenirs in China, and he told his sister that the Navy was great. They had 3 square meals a day and all the mashed potatoes he could eat. But being on board ship seemed to help him because as a child he had asthma, but once he joined the Navy, the asthma went away. Okay, now this is Tony Anthony, the older brother. He had received a deferment because he was working at Union Carbide. But all the old Italian ladies from Dickinson were harassing him because they said that their sons had to go, so why was he still here? So he gave up his deferment, and he joined the Navy, and he was sent to Alaska. By the way, those of you who don't know that on the Aleutian chain in Alaska of islands, the last island, Adak, is strategic because at that time, that's where all the Navy had their ships and aircraft that were taking off to bound Japan. Now we spy on the Russians from there. Okay, there's his draft card. And this is a picture of both sons in their Navy uniforms with and Joe Giacchino during World War II, and that's Andy's wife. They called her Smiles. Her name was really Marion. Now here's the Giacchino children. Caroline, died in 2010 at age 90. She was the eldest. Anthony died in 2008 at 87. And Andrew, the youngest, died in 1992 at age 88. There's Caroline and Anthony and Andrew. Now, the home was in the Nicholstone subdivision at 4312 Gore Street, which was the Italian section of Dickinson, until it was moved to its present location in 2004 by Richard and Catherine Lewis of the League City Historical Society. They were looking for a little guest house for their grandchildren who visited. They got 14 grandchildren. And the house now sits on their property, and there's also another historic home there in Lake City, the Cox McGurk House. And it's 5 acres. They call it the Rolling R Ranch. And since COVID, we don't do historic homes tours anymore, but we do tours of the historic homes where there is somebody on the front porch. So of course, I do Giacchino, and you can walk around and see all the historic homes. Catherine was the director and founder of the one-room schoolhouse, West Bay Common School Museum. It's our 30th anniversary this year, and Richard's the vice president. Okay, this is a picture in 1942 of Anthony, Caroline, and Andrew in front of the home on Gore Street. And this is the Google Earth view in 2013. It was an empty lot. And this is what was there in 2000. I haven't been back to see if that place is still there. I took that with Matt Falco in 2016. That was, I think it was like an auto parts store at the time, is what's there now. Now, this is the restored home located on Walker Street in Lake City. This is 2013, the first time it was ready for the homes tour. It won the prestigious Sally B. Wallace Preservation Award from Galveston Historical Foundation. And there's Bernadine and myself accepting the award for Lewis. So it was kind of nice she got to accept the award for her grandfather's house. Now also alongside, there's Joe at his forge. By the way, he used a regular anvil for 40 years before he bought power tools. The seed store, he also had the seed store, which was next door to his blacksmith shop. There's him in his blacksmith shop. And he was called Blackjack Bow. And these photos are from the Galveston Daily News. They did a big story about him because he was the only blacksmith. Now, this is an undated picture of the
seed store. His blacksmith shop was opened in 1941, and it was 4 times bigger than the seed store. And it had been the Dews gas station, and it was perfect because they had 2 front doors that opened up so the wagons could come in, because he did wagon wheels, he shoed horses, and he repaired plows, he made horseshoes. This is this is a picture of the Dickinson seed store in 1997. It opened in 1931. These are pictures I took with Matt in 2013 when this was on the property of Jim and Carol Yates in Dickinson. They had rescued it off of Marsh Movers' lot. Marsh Movers, he says he's a recycler. Whenever he sees a house that he thinks is worth saving, he just moves it to his lot in New City until somebody buys it. So this was 2013, and there was the original sign. As you can see, it was pretty bad shape. Now in 2019, the Dickinson Historical Society moved it to the depot in the museum on 517. And that's them. Imagine that little house being moved by just a little truck. And this is where they restored it. This is the front in 2021. This is the restored front porch. You can see it when I go over there and see it when you take a tour of the depot. They restored the sign. Oh, and also, besides all his blacksmith stuff, Joe was a stonemason, like many other Italians, and he would make headstones for people who didn't have money. And he made this for his wife Lily's grave, and one for a neighbor girl, Nancy Emmett, the daughter of Sam and Annie Emmett, who died at age 5 because they were too poor to afford a headstone, so he made a headstone for them. Okay, in 1940, Joe listed his highest education as the 1st grade on his draft registration, and he was 59 when he registered for the draft. He said he had no telephone in his residence in Dickinson. His home had electricity late in the war, only because a friend of his daughter had it installed so the family could listen to the news on the radio and hear about their sons instead of having to go to somebody else's house. In 1944, he became an American citizen. He said it was the happiest day of his life. And he worked as a blacksmith and sold seeds until he died at age 80 in 1962. And he's in Mount Olivet Cemetery. And there's Joe and his granddaughter Bernadine, who's a retired teacher in Sugar Land, in front of his home. Okay. Now, after Joe's death, the daughter, Caroline, and her husband, Harlan Mallory, who was also a veteran in World War II in the Army, stayed there and lived there and worked the seed store until they moved away in 1997. After her husband died, she took her daughter Bernadine and she moved away. The home and the lot were sold to Dickinson Fire Department, and when they didn't want it anymore, when they sold it, they figured the fire department would eventually burn it down, but they didn't. So it was kind of collapsing. That's when Marsh Movers went and saved it. Okay. This is the original front door entry and window and living room. It was originally 718 square feet, but the lot was 8,000 square feet. This is the restored front door entry and living room. The woodwork is all original. In fact, Richard Lewis did most of the restoration himself. He's a handyman. He likes to do that stuff. It's original to the living room and the small bedroom. The inside colors are original, apparently. Sherwin-Williams has all these historic paints, so just bring them a piece of paint and then match the color. Now, the family kitchen was added on after the family moved in, and they added a back porch. It was not original to the house. But when the house came to League City, somewhere along the line, that kitchen, bath, and front porch weren't attached anymore, so it was only 500 square feet. And the only surviving rooms were the living room and the bedroom. And these are the windows, living room. They are original glass, and Richard had them reglazed. The original glass, all the windows in the living room and the bedroom are original. And the home's interior colors are all the same, and the floors are the original cypress wood. They've been refinished. When they were doing, and this is the original bedroom, and you can see the little door on the right, and this is the restored bedroom. They found 3 asphalt shingled roofs dating back to 1929, and they replaced it with a metal one. The plasterboard walls were gutted to expose solid wood walls behind them, so they took all the plaster off and restored the solid wood. And they found that they had a brick chimney, but the water had rotted it out, so they had to remove the chimney. This is the bedroom where Joe's rocking chair stood, original bedroom, and there's Joe in his rocking chair. And there's Bernadine in her grandfather's bedroom with the original. That's the only thing they found in the house that was original. When they moved, it was the rack where they hung the clothes. And so they had to restore the where the brick was. They had to take it out because it was everything was rotted. So they made an original door, and they started replacing. They had to replace to come up to code all the electricity. But what you see there, they restored the 1920s Art Deco porcelain wiring where they could get a permit from the city to do it. So they restored the original Art Deco. Okay, now they remodeled it and they put the bathroom in because it had no indoor plumbing. This is the view of the kitchenette, the entryway where the chimney was in the original home, but they had to replace it because of the rot. The restoration process was out-of-pocket cost was $8,000, including $2,500 to move the house. Lewis performed all the manual labor for 8 years, from 2004 to 2012. Now the home was first open to historic home stores in 2013. That was pre-COVID, so we allowed everybody to walk through the house and see the rebuilt kitchen and the door and the porch. And then there's Bernadine with the docent. She came down to meet and greet everyone in her grandfather's house. Anybody have any questions? Yes. Yeah, Bernadine said they had like an outhouse. They got electricity late in 44 after the war, from the very beginning. And the house was built in 29 and moved in 30. So for 14 years, they didn't have electricity. So they had the brick like fireplace and oven, and that's what they cooked. And the outhouse. Well, no, it had an outhouse till the end. That's what the first bathroom you see there was the first bathroom that house had. So Bernadine said after everybody died, she was living there with her mom after her dad died in the house. They moved in 1997. They still went in the outhouse. That's dedication. That's dedication. And Bernadine said that, she was getting ready to get married, and her mother wanted to stay in the house. Her mother stayed a little bit in the house without Bernadine, but Bernadine didn't want to leave her there because of the outhouse, and the woman was 90 when she died. So she kind of made her move. And then she decided that, the city of Dickinson told her to get that piece of junk off the property. She had to sell it. So when she sold the property, nobody wanted the house except the fire department. But they didn't. She figured they were going to burn it down, and she was very surprised. She didn't even know the house existed until I started doing the research, and someone introduced me to Matt, who knew her. And he introduced me. We called her up, and she said the house is still there. They didn't burn it down. And I just spoke to her the other day. She couldn't make it, but she has the original rose bushes that were in front of her grandfather's, in front of their house. They took them. And she lost all but one bush during the freeze 2 years ago. So she's trying to make a cutting for us so we can put a cutting in front of the house. We put a rose bush in front of the house. Yeah, they she said that, she thought that was the only way people lived, when she was a kid, they went up to the outhouse. And to think about that, they only had one bedroom, okay? So Giacchino Giacchino stayed in the bedroom after his wife died, but the kids all slept on couches and on the floor in the living room. Yeah.
His blacksmith business, he couldn't believe solely on that. He also had a huge store.
Well, the blacksmith was okay, but he decided there was a real need for seeds. So he decided to create the seed store too, which survived. I mean, people still talk about the seed store. And what they're trying to do now is when the Dickinson Historical Society restored it, they talked to Bernadine to find out what kind of seeds they had. They're trying to sell the same seeds.
Yes, I remember the seed store from when I was a kid. My grandmother was in Germany, and she was on the corner of Italy and Maine. And I remember seeing that little seed store. I just wanted to know like how long was open for ever, so the siding in there and everything.
1997 is when they moved.
Oh, wow, so they were.
She
open
sold,
all
well,
that
after,
time.
Joe, the boys went off to the Navy and then they got married, didn't come back. Caroline, the daughter, stayed there and she got married. Her husband Howard came in from World War II and he stayed there and they had their daughter. And after he died, she and the daughter stayed there and they operated, she said they operated the seed store. This is all her oral history that she's given me because other than what Nate Falco told me and Vernon, there's no documentation on any of this. I mean, there's a couple articles in Johnson News about it, but that's it. And so she did a phenomenal oral history. And I have like over 100 pictures that I scanned for her. I was trying to figure out maybe next year, I'll figure out how to put all the pictures on the poster board. But she said until 1997, they sold seeds. So what happened is the fire department took the house and Jim and Carol Yates took the seed store. I guess they were partners and it was on their property. And they wouldn't let anybody see it, but Nick talked to me to let anybody that was interested. I got like over 82 pictures of it. And I was in the Navy, I was a journalist, public affairs officer, and photojournalist. So I wanted to take as many pictures as I could of the inside and outside of it, as it was in the state of disrepair in 2013. So between 1997 and 2013, it just rotted on their property. And then finally, the Dickinson Historical Society moved it in 2019, and then started restoring it. But I've heard a lot of people, when I did this presentation at the Historical Society, everybody said, yeah, we used to buy seeds. And I'm up for about, what's a seed store?
I've never been there, I just remember seeing it all the time, you can see it really good.
Well, check their website, the Dickinson Historical Society, because when the actual depot and everything is open, you can walk in and walk right in there and see it. Yeah, it really looks nice too. And they did the same thing that the Lewises did. They, Sherman Williams, they made their fortune with those historic paintings. So you get rid of a piece of paint, and they digitize it, and they paint it, which is wonderful. Because, like the turquoise color in the Giacchino home, who would have thought that they had turquoise? Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you.
Okay, shut it. Okay, I'll put this down here. It doesn't